story is based on true events. My name is Ethan Carter, and I never believed in the supernatural until I experienced the horror that lay within the walls of Blackwood Mansion. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first arrived at the mansion, a dilapidated Victorian-era house that had been abandoned for decades. I was a historian by profession, and the mansion was rumored to hold secrets about the town's dark past. Little did I know, it also held something far more sinister. The mansion stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, its once grand facade now cloaked in ivy and shadows. As I approached, the air grew colder, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. The front door, hanging on its hinges, creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the fading sunlight that filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. The grand foyer, with its cracked marble floors and rotting wood paneling, hinted at the mansion's former glory. A massive chandelier, encrusted with years of grime, hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals tinkling softly as if whispering secrets from the past. I made my way through the house, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. The walls were adorned with faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes following me as I moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. As I explored further, I discovered a hidden staircase behind a tattered tapestry. The steps creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder as I descended into the darkness. At the bottom, I found a narrow corridor lined with doors. Each door was different, some made of heavy oak, others of iron, but all bore strange symbols carved into the wood. One door in particular caught my attention. It was made of dark mahogany, its surface polished to a sinister sheen. The symbol carved into it was unlike any I had seen before, a twisted, interlocking pattern that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As I reached for the handle, a chill ran down my spine, and I hesitated. But curiosity got the better of me, and I turned the handle. The room beyond was a library, its walls lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes and manuscripts. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. In the center of the room stood a large oak desk, covered in a thick layer of dust. I approached the desk and saw that it held a single book, its leather cover cracked and worn. As I opened the book, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the candles flickered as if disturbed by an unseen presence. The pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations, written in a language I could not decipher. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary book. It was a grimoire, a book of dark magic. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally managed to turn it on, the beam of light revealed something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the corner of the room was a figure, cloaked in shadows. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it seemed to be watching me with an intensity that was almost palpable. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with fear. But as I turned to flee, the figure moved, blocking my path. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the room, speaking words I could not understand. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the cold air. The figure stepped closer, and I could feel its icy presence pressing against me, suffocating me with its malevolence. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering as if struggling against the darkness that now filled the room. Desperation took hold, and I reached for the grimoire, hoping that it might hold some clue to banish this entity. But as I did, the figure lunged at me, its clawed hands reaching for my throat. In that moment, I knew I was facing something beyond my understanding, something ancient and evil. The air was thick with its presence, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. As the figure's hands tightened around my neck, I could feel my strength ebbing away, my vision growing dim. Just when I thought I was about to be consumed by the darkness, the door to the library burst open, flooding the room with light. The figure recoiled, its form dissolving into the shadows. Gasping for breath, I stumbled toward the door, driven by a primal urge to escape. I don't know how I made it out of the mansion, but when I finally emerged into the cool night air, I collapsed on the ground, trembling with fear. The mansion loomed behind me, its dark windows staring back like empty eyes. From that day on, I vowed never to return to Blackwood Mansion. The experience left me with a deep-seated fear of the dark, and I could never shake the feeling that something had followed me from that accursed place. The grimoire, the symbols, and the malevolent figure haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the terror I had faced. And as the years passed, I came to realize that some secrets are better left undiscovered, some doors better left unopened. For there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that dwell in the shadows, waiting for those foolish enough to seek them out. And I was one of the few who had come face to face with the darkness that lies just beyond the edge of our understanding. Despite my resolve to stay away from Blackwood Mansion, the events of that night gnawed at my mind. My sleep was plagued with nightmares, the figure's glowing eyes and the grimoire's cryptic symbols imprinted on my consciousness. Each morning, I woke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding with a fear that refused to subside. Months passed, but the terror did not diminish. Instead, it grew stronger, a shadowy presence that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I began to see the figure in the periphery of my vision, a fleeting glimpse of darkness that vanished when I turned to look. It whispered to me in my dreams, its voice a low, insistent murmur that filled me with dread. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I sought out experts in the occult and the supernatural. I pored over ancient texts and consulted with scholars who specialized in the arcane. But no one could offer a satisfactory explanation for what I had encountered. The more I learned, the more I realized that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding. One evening, as I was researching in my study, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the matches, my hands shaking, and when I finally struck a light, I saw that the grimoire was lying open on my desk. I had locked it away in a drawer, but now it was back, its pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen hand. My heart raced as I approached the desk, the sense of foreboding growing with each step. The book's pages were now filled with new symbols, and a single word stood out among them: return. It was a command, an imperative that filled me with a sense of inevitability. Despite my fear, I knew I had to go back to the mansion. There were answers there, hidden in the darkness, and I could no longer avoid them. The next morning, I packed my bag with supplies and set out for Blackwood Mansion. The journey was a blur, my mind consumed by a mixture of dread and determination. As I approached the mansion, the sky darkened and a chill wind howled through the trees. The house stood as I had left it, an imposing silhouette against the stormy sky. I entered the mansion, the familiar smell of decay greeting me. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I retraced my steps to the hidden staircase and descended into the corridor lined with doors. The door to the library was open, the room beyond bathed in an unnatural glow. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the candles on the walls flickered to life. The grimoire lay on the desk, its pages open to the same symbols I had seen the night before. I approached it cautiously, my breath visible in the frigid air. The room seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, a tangible sense of malevolence that pressed down on me. I reached for the grimoire, my fingers trembling. As I touched it, a shock ran through me, and the symbols on the pages began to glow. The air filled with a low, resonant hum, and the room darkened. The figure appeared once more, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. This time, I was prepared. I held the grimoire aloft and began to read the incantations, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. The figure recoiled, its form writhing as if in pain. The symbols on the grimoire glowed brighter, and the hum grew louder, reverberating through the room. The air crackled with energy, and the figure let out a deafening roar, its eyes blazing with fury. I continued to read, my voice rising above the cacophony, and the figure began to dissipate, its form dissolving into the shadows. Suddenly, the room was plunged into silence. The figure was gone, and the oppressive darkness lifted. I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted and shaking. The grimoire lay beside me, its pages blank once more. I had banished the entity, but at what cost? The mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the air growing warmer as the candles flickered and died. I left the library and made my way back up the hidden staircase. As I emerged into the foyer, I felt a sense of closure, a finality that told me the mansion's dark secrets had been laid to rest. I walked out into the cool night air, the sky now clear and filled with stars. The shadows that had haunted me seemed to dissipate, leaving me with a sense of peace I had not felt in months. But as I drove away from Blackwood Mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was not entirely gone. It lingered on the edge of my consciousness, a reminder of the horrors I had faced. And though I had escaped the mansion's clutches, I knew that the shadows would always be a part of me, a silent witness to the terror that lay just beyond the edge of the light. Months passed since my harrowing return to Blackwood Mansion, and life slowly regained a semblance of normalcy. The nightmares that once tormented my sleep became less frequent, and the shadowy figure ceased its relentless pursuit. Yet, an uneasy feeling lingered, a nagging sense that my encounter with the supernatural had left something unfinished. One evening, while reviewing my notes and the scant information I had gathered, I received an unexpected visitor. A tall, thin man with piercing blue eyes and an aura of gravitas introduced himself as Dr. Adrian Blackwood, a descendant of the original owners of the mansion. He had learned of my investigation and wanted to share his family's history, a history steeped in mystery and dark secrets. Dr. Blackwood spoke in a measured, deliberate tone, revealing that his ancestors had been practitioners of arcane arts. The mansion had served as a haven for their studies in the occult, a place where rituals were performed to commune with otherworldly entities. He believed that the figure I encountered was a manifestation of one such entity, bound to the mansion through a powerful ritual gone awry. As Dr. Blackwood recounted the tales of his forebears, a clearer picture began to form. The mansion had been built over a site of ancient power, a confluence of ley lines that amplified supernatural energy. The grimoire I had found was a key to harnessing this energy, a tool used to summon and control the entity that now haunted the mansion. The doctor proposed a daring plan, to return to Blackwood Mansion and perform a counter-ritual to sever the entity's ties to our world. Though the prospect filled me with dread, I agreed. The thought of finally putting an end to the haunting was too compelling to resist. The preparations for the ritual were meticulous. We gathered rare herbs, ancient relics, and texts filled with incantations. Dr. Blackwood insisted on performing the ritual during the new moon, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest. The day arrived, and we set out for the mansion, our hearts heavy with anticipation and fear. As we approached Blackwood Mansion, the sky darkened, and a sense of foreboding settled over us. The mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the night sky. We entered through the creaking front door, and the familiar chill enveloped us. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of our footsteps. We made our way to the library, the heart of the mansion's dark power. The room was as I had left it, the grimoire still lying on the desk. Dr. Blackwood began to set up the ritual, placing candles at precise intervals and drawing intricate symbols on the floor with chalk. As he worked, he explained the significance of each element, his voice steady and authoritative. With everything in place, we stood at the center of the room, the grimoire opened before us. Dr. Blackwood began to chant, his voice resonating with an otherworldly power. I joined in, my voice trembling but determined. The air crackled with energy, and the temperature plummeted. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness. The candles were extinguished, and an icy wind howled through the mansion. The shadows coalesced into a familiar figure, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. The entity had returned, summoned by our ritual. But this time, we were prepared. Dr. Blackwood continued his incantation, his voice rising above the howling wind. I held the grimoire aloft, its pages glowing with an intense light. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. The symbols on the floor began to glow, creating a barrier that the entity could not cross. The entity let out a deafening roar, its eyes blazing with fury. It lunged at us, but the barrier held, repelling its advance. Dr. Blackwood's voice grew louder, the incantation reaching its climax. The entity writhed and twisted, its form dissolving into shadows. With a final, ear-piercing shriek, it was banished, its presence dissipating into the ether. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting. The candles reignited, casting a warm, comforting glow. Dr. Blackwood and I stood in the center of the room, exhausted but triumphant. The ritual had worked. The entity was gone, its ties to our world severed. We left Blackwood Mansion, the weight of its dark history lifted from our shoulders. As we walked away, the night sky cleared, revealing a canopy of stars. The mansion stood in silence, its haunted past laid to rest. In the weeks that followed, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. The nightmares ceased, and the shadowy figure no longer haunted my periphery. I returned to my studies, but the experience had changed me. I had glimpsed a world beyond our own, a realm of darkness and light, and I knew that some mysteries were best left unexplored. Dr. Blackwood and I stayed in touch, our shared experience forging a bond of friendship. We continued our research, but with a newfound respect for the forces we sought to understand. The mansion remained abandoned, a silent sentinel over the town's dark history, and though the shadows no longer held their terror, they served as a reminder of the unseen forces that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding. As the years passed, the memory of Blackwood Mansion faded, but the lessons I learned remained. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And though the shadows still whispered their secrets, I knew that I had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Years passed since the harrowing events at Blackwood Mansion, and life had finally returned to a semblance of normalcy. The nightmares that once plagued me had receded, and the shadowy figure was now a distant memory. Dr. Adrian Blackwood and I had stayed in touch, our shared ordeal forging a bond that transcended our professional relationship. We continued our research into the occult, driven by a desire to understand the forces that had nearly destroyed us. One autumn evening, I received a letter from Dr. Blackwood. His handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. The contents of the letter sent a chill down my spine. He had discovered new information about the entity we had faced, a revelation that threatened to unravel the fragile peace we had worked so hard to achieve. Dr. Blackwood's letter spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the mansion, a place where the most dangerous rituals were performed. He had found references to this chamber in a recently uncovered diary of his ancestor, a diary that detailed the binding of the entity and the terrible price paid to contain it. The chamber was described as a place of immense power, a focal point of the mansion's dark energy. The letter ended with a plea for my help in sealing the chamber permanently, to ensure that the entity could never return. Reluctantly, I agreed to join him. The thought of returning to Blackwood Mansion filled me with dread, but I knew that this was a task that could not be ignored. If the entity were to escape again, the consequences would be catastrophic. We met at the mansion on a cold, foggy morning. The once grand structure now seemed even more decrepit, its facade crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the distant cawing of crows. We entered the mansion, our footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Dr. Blackwood led me to a section of the basement I had never explored. Hidden behind a false wall, we found a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder as we descended, and the smell of damp earth and mold filled our nostrils. The staircase ended in a heavy iron door, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light of our flashlights. With great effort, we pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with shelves holding ancient tomes and jars filled with mysterious substances. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, a tangible sense of malevolence that seemed to press down on us. Dr. Blackwood set to work, arranging candles and drawing intricate symbols on the floor. He explained that we needed to perform a sealing ritual, a complex incantation that would bind the chamber and prevent the entity from ever escaping. As he prepared, I explored the chamber, my flashlight illuminating the dark corners and hidden alcoves. In one corner, I found a small wooden box, its surface covered in the same symbols that adorned the iron door. I opened it cautiously, revealing a collection of old photographs and letters. The photographs showed a group of people, their faces stern and resolute. Among them, I recognized Dr. Blackwood's ancestor, his expression one of grim determination. The letters detailed the original binding of the entity, a ritual that had required a great sacrifice. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me. The binding ritual had been performed at a terrible cost, requiring the life of a young girl. Her spirit had been used to anchor the entity, trapping it within the mansion. The realization hit me like a blow. The entity's malevolence was fueled by the suffering of an innocent soul. I shared my discovery with Dr. Blackwood, his face growing pale as he read the letters. The full horror of his family's actions became clear, and the weight of their sins bore down on us both. We knew that our task was not just to seal the chamber, but to free the trapped spirit and allow it to find peace. With renewed determination, we began the ritual. Dr. Blackwood chanted the incantations, his voice steady and strong. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the floor glowed brightly. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the room dropped, and the oppressive energy grew stronger. Suddenly, the chamber was plunged into darkness. The candles flickered and went out, and a cold wind howled through the room. The shadows coalesced into a familiar figure, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The entity had returned, drawn by the power of the ritual. But this time, we were ready. Dr. Blackwood continued the incantation, his voice rising above the howling wind. I held the grimoire aloft, its pages glowing with an intense light. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. The symbols on the floor began to glow, creating a barrier that the entity could not cross. The entity let out a deafening roar, its eyes blazing with fury. It lunged at us, but the barrier held, repelling its advance. Dr. Blackwood's voice grew louder, the incantation reaching its climax. The entity writhed and twisted, its form dissolving into shadows. With a final, ear-piercing shriek, it was banished, its presence dissipating into the ether. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting. The candles reignited, casting a warm, comforting glow. Dr. Blackwood and I stood in the center of the room, exhausted but triumphant. The ritual had worked. The entity was gone, its ties to our world severed. We left the chamber, the weight of its dark history lifted from our shoulders. As we ascended the staircase, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive silence was replaced by the sounds of the outside world. We emerged into the light, the sun shining brightly through the broken windows. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in years. The nightmares ceased, and the shadowy figure no longer haunted my periphery. Dr. Blackwood and I continued our research, but with a newfound respect for the forces we sought to understand. The mansion remained abandoned, a silent sentinel over the town's dark history. As the years passed, the memory of Blackwood Mansion faded, but the lessons I learned remained. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And though the shadows still whispered their secrets, I knew that I had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. But deep down, I knew that the darkness could never be fully banished. It lingered on the edge of our understanding, a reminder of the unseen forces that lurk just beyond the light. And as I lay awake at night, I could still hear the faint whispers, a haunting echo of the past that would never truly fade. Years had slipped by since the resolution of the Blackwood Mansion ordeal. The sense of finality had settled in my life, yet a gnawing uncertainty lingered in the corners of my mind. Dr. Adrian Blackwood and I continued to pursue our research, but the shadows of our past experiences remained, reminders of the darkness we had faced together. One brisk winter's evening, as I was poring over old manuscripts, a new letter arrived from Dr. Blackwood. His handwriting was as precise as ever, but the message was fraught with urgency. He had discovered something alarming in his latest research, an ancient prophecy that hinted at the possible return of the entity we had thought we had banished forever. The prophecy spoke of a cycle, suggesting that every few decades, the entity would attempt to breach our world again if its confinement was not properly reinforced. The letter described an old ritual that could renew the binding and ensure the entity's permanent imprisonment. However, the ritual required something beyond our previous efforts, a relic of immense power, believed to be hidden within the mansion. Dr. Blackwood's letter implored me to return to Blackwood Mansion, to help locate this relic and perform the necessary rites. A sense of foreboding settled over me as I read the letter. The mansion had been a place of profound terror, and the idea of returning was unsettling. But the thought of the entity escaping again, unleashing its malevolent power, compelled me to act. I agreed to meet Dr. Blackwood at the mansion and prepare for the ritual. The journey to Blackwood Mansion was fraught with tension. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, obscuring the road ahead. As we approached the mansion, its dilapidated form emerged from the mist, an imposing silhouette against the grey sky. The once grand estate now appeared even more forsaken, its windows boarded up, and ivy creeping over the cracked stone walls. Dr. Blackwood and I entered the mansion, the air inside cold and stale. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the vast, empty halls. We made our way to the library, where we had faced the entity before. The room was as we had left it, but an unsettling aura pervaded the space. Dr. Blackwood began to prepare for the ritual, his movements precise and deliberate. We meticulously searched the mansion for the relic described in the prophecy. Hours passed as we combed through dusty rooms and hidden alcoves, the oppressive darkness pressing down on us. Finally, in a concealed chamber beneath the library, we found an ornate chest covered in intricate carvings. Inside the chest lay an ancient amulet, its surface etched with runes and symbols that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. The amulet was rumored to be a key to reinforcing the binding of the entity, and its power was palpable. As we examined the relic, I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder of the danger that still lurked within the mansion. With the amulet in hand, we set up for the ritual. Dr. Blackwood explained that the ritual was more complex than before, requiring us to align the mansion's energy with the amulet's power. We arranged the candles and drew symbols on the floor, the air crackling with anticipation. As the new moon rose, We began the ritual. Dr. Blackwood chanted the incantations, his voice resonating with ancient power. The amulet glowed brightly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature in the room dropped, and an oppressive energy filled the air. Suddenly, the shadows began to coalesce, forming the familiar figure of the entity. Its eyes burned with malevolent fire, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The entity had returned, drawn by the power of the ritual and the amulet. Dr. Blackwood's voice grew louder, the incantation reaching its crescendo. I held the amulet aloft, its light piercing through the darkness. The entity recoiled, its form writhing as if in pain. The symbols on the floor glowed brightly, creating a barrier that the entity could not cross. But the entity fought back with renewed fury. It howled and roared, its form shifting and distorting. The air crackled with energy, and the room was filled with a deafening cacophony. Dr. Blackwood and I struggled to maintain our focus, our voices rising in unison as we chanted the incantations. The amulet's light intensified, and the symbols on the floor began to pulse with a rhythmic energy. The entity's form began to dissolve, its presence slowly being drawn back into the shadows. With a final, earth-shattering roar, it was banished once more, its essence dissipating into the void. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting. The candles flickered back to life, casting a warm, soothing glow. Dr. Blackwood and I stood in the center of the room, exhausted but triumphant. The ritual had worked. The entity was gone, its ties to our world severed. We left the mansion, the weight of its dark history lifted from our shoulders. As we walked away, the night sky cleared, revealing a blanket of stars. The mansion stood in silence, its haunting past finally laid to rest. In the days and weeks that followed, the sense of peace grew stronger. The nightmares ceased, and the shadows that had once plagued me faded into memory. Dr. Blackwood and I continued our research, but our experiences had changed us. We approached the supernatural with a newfound respect and understanding, aware of the delicate balance between worlds. Blackwood Mansion remained abandoned, a silent sentinel over its dark history. The relic we had found was placed in a secure location, its power used only to ensure the continued confinement of the entity. The mansion's secrets were buried with its past, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the edge of the light. As time passed, the memory of Blackwood Mansion became a distant echo, but the lessons learned remained. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And though the shadows still whispered their secrets, I knew that I had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. In the quiet moments of reflection, I could still hear the faint whispers of the past, a haunting reminder of the forces that lurk just beyond our understanding. The darkness may never be fully vanquished, but the light of our courage and determination shone brighter, guiding us through the shadows and into the dawn of a new day.